All right. Um, let me see. Okay. All right. So, doulas matter because, we have the research that really tells us that, like, that the presence of a doula can help to lower interventions, like a lot of the steps that come along with having the birth, like, oh, we're going to give you pitocin, oh, we're going to do, we're going to break your water, or we're going to do this and that, whatever, right? A lot of that is kind of lessened with the presence of a doula, for one, because doulas can give the information and also help clients to assess, do a kind of a risk reward like analysis over these different like interventions, right? And so sometimes it's also a matter of introducing um, alternatives that can be considered as well. It's like, okay, maybe we shouldn't break the water at this time. Maybe we can try a different like position to see if we can like work baby down, if that's the reason, and that if that's the goal that we're trying to go on to another step for. So statistically, the presence of doulas lowers the rates of cesarean. Statistically, we have the evidence that shows that we have like shorter labors with the presence of a doula, fewer intervention, and then overall just feeling like better about the overall like birth experience, right? Like a lot of times when people sit and reflect on their birth experience, then if they had a doula, they tend to reflect more positively and not in a way that is negative and traumatic, which that impacts a lot how people feel about their birth. And it also is a factor in terms of like postpartum depression and anxiety as well that we don't want to overlook. And so, but so doulas in general are very like, beneficial, like for people just to have that support, that guidance, that education, that, comfort, um, during the birth process. But then a layer to that, right, would be the presence of a Muslim doula, where it's like other things that we have to, to consider in terms of like, accommodating, our cultures, our traditions, our values, the family dynamics, and things like that. Religious obligations, like prayer and and stuff like that, and creating just other aspects of advocacy within that birth space. And then also the spiritual part of it is kind of like those reminders of like, yes, this is hard, but this is a purification, like of your sins, right? Like this is bringing you closer to your baby and closer to Allah. So it's kind of like being able to recenter, these things, that birth itself is an act of worship, and being able to remind families and like and guide them through that. And so, and with that, although there are some doulas that are well trained in regards to the birth space, some of them also lack considerations for for Muslim clients. Some of them lack some of the cultural sensitivities that might be important to us. And so and I think a lot of times people find you know it's challenging to understand that like within birth work, that it's something that still there's is still a lot of racism, right, within birth work. And so a lot of times when we look at trainings, and it's like, oh, this is a training that has like an emphasis on like diversity and equity and inclusion, a lot of times that is oriented towards like the LGBTQIA community, and like in just gender affirming care, and not, and it can still be like um, racist, like it can still be like anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant within some of those trainings, right? And so some of the things that are meant to be inclusive still leave out Muslims. And so this is a matter of saying, this is why Muslim doulas matter, because if clients are treated in that way, in that capacity, like we hold that tension and we carry all of that within our birth environment. We carry that within our bodies, right? And so this is a matter of just like another layer of protection, and and empowerment for families as they transition into becoming parents. And so birth doulas work kind of all over the place. Hospitals are very common. So if somebody has like an OBGYN for their primary care provider, more than likely they're going to be delivering at a hospital. Most hospitals are doula friendly, and and they can function in their role even in the event of a cesarean birth. Like, so a lot of times, even though doulas don't operate in a medical capacity, they are considered a part of the healthcare team for the birthing parent. And so if there is a cesarean that's scheduled, then sometimes doulas are allowed to attend the surgical birth as well. And so 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 there's during COVID, I think time was really when they got kind of strict about the presence of doulas, just because they were limiting access to people. But in general, doulas can work in the hospitals and don't have any issues with that, and are seen as like a support, not only for the pregnant person, but doulas tend to make the work of doctors and nurses a little bit easier sometimes too, right? Because instead of clients having to call the nurse in for a simple question or to clarify something, it's like the doula is kind of that go-between, and so they don't have to to come back and attend to questions and things like that. Or even like little errands like grabbing ice or coffee for that, they don't have to do that as much. So those kinds of things can be like really helpful. Doulas also work in birth centers, right? Like birth centers that have the attendance of a midwife. They can do that. Doulas can also work in like in home births. And there's also like an aspect of like a free birthing, which some people do. This isn't something, a lot of doula training organizations kind of discourage doula supporting free birth organizations. I personally, as a doula, do not support clients during free birth experiences, simply because in the event that something isn't going well, then they will be kind of looking to me for medical care, and that's out of the scope of work as a doula. And so I place a personal limitation on that. I don't support. I would advocate for somebody to have that if that's what they choose, but just as a doula, like as a professional, I do not attend free births. And so, meaning free birth, meaning no care provider, no medical care provider. So if it's like, a birth in the woods, but there's a midwife there and I'm the dude, like I'm okay with that. But just somebody saying, I'm just going to go and birth in my backyard or whatever with no other medical care providers, that's a limitation for me. So doulas also provide virtual support. So a lot of the educational, informational part of it can very, very easily be done virtually. During COVID, when kind of like everything shut down, we had no other choice but to support clients, virtually. And so, so in that way, it's like there's a lot that can be done virtually, including teaching of like the skills that you need like in person, right? So there are options, to support clients all different kinds of ways. Sorry, was this my next slide? Here we go. Um, and so there's a broad range of services that birth doulas provide, right? This includes prenatal visits that can be in person, that can be virtual support, helping out with the birth planning, with coping techniques, comfort measures, just the preparation for like what goes into labor and birth, that educational support. Some doulas have, like myself, I'm a doula, but I'm also a childbirth educator, right? And so I tend to work with clients with a little bit more detail of like understanding the stages of labor, what to expect, what's helpful during the different stages, and kind of like what's not. But not all doulas are childbirth educators. And so sometimes that's additional training that they might outsource to somebody that has a specialty in that. Doulas offer also, on-call support. Typically, in the later stage, I personally, will take clients to be considered like on call once they hit 36 weeks, even though most babies, aren't born at 36 weeks. And so 30 for first time moms, 39 to 41 weeks is kind of like the average, but it's very possible that mom goes into labor at 36, 37, 38 weeks. And so but yeah, so it's like that support. And sometimes this is just as an intermediary, right? Like sometimes they will call and they have a question. It's like I might not have that information, but I think that this is a good time to go ahead and like and call your doctor, or we do an assessment of like where things are, and it's kind of like, oh, things are further along maybe than we thought. It might be good to just go ahead and go up to labor and delivery and get an assessment there, and then I'll be on standby. And then sometimes it's kind of like, hey, a simple question like, I have this thing, it looks kind of funny, can you look at it? And then we can advise from there, like, oh yeah, that's normal, that's nothing to worry about. Or maybe that's like something that we should go ahead and like get an assessment for from your care provider. So sometimes it's just kind of helping them to kind of gauge where things are, right? Like it's that educational support that really comes in like helpful, and also giving that reassurance of where things are, in terms of this is maybe prodromal labor, right? Maybe this is Braxton Hicks, and maybe not like true labor, but we'll keep an eye on it, right? So that they aren't running to labor and delivery every time they have like a small, like little issue, and also to just kind of reduce some of the paranoia, and concern that new parents especially feel. So so there's the on-call support, there's a continuous labor support, and that's really like from the time that labor is in a good flow to the time that baby is born. Then you have a doula there by your side, that is respecting and encouraging the immediate postpartum preferences of the parent. So that can be, skin to skin contact for the, the golden hour. That can be help with like with breastfeeding, kind of like settling in after birth. That can be explaining the different procedures that are happening after birth, right? Like, if mom has to have, stitches, for example, it's like, here's what's happening. And if we need to have more discussions about that, or if they're using certain medications or whatever, it's like, here's the medication that they're using. It's for this purpose. A lot of these things we want to introduce before we even get to that stage, because sometimes it's hard to take in information for the first time when you're already experiencing it, especially if you're in pain, right? So a lot of the work of what to expect when birth happens before we even have the first contraction. And so there's, so there's the immediate postpartum follow-up. There's also extended postpartum care, that some people have additional training for extended postpartum care, and they will offer that sometimes as a part of like packages, or sometimes it's just a simple follow-up, after like a day, or after 7 days, or maybe after, like 2 weeks after having the baby, just to check in with the family, and or to help with like birth processing, right? So sometimes it's a matter of like, this happened during birth, and and I have a question about that, and why did that happen, and what could have been done differently, or whatever. Like sometimes it's just that, let's check back in and see how you're feeling about like your birth experience, and what lingering questions or concerns do you have that come along with that, and how can we navigate that. So there's a lot of different ways that doulas can work. A lot of doulas are, completely independent, have their own business, and, and just kind of go for it in that way. Some doulas are, and usually if they're independent, then they usually will have like a, at least like one or two like backup doulas, so that, in the event that they're unable to attend a birth, and they can like reach out to somebody and support them in that way. But, so yeah, doulas can be completely independent. Doulas can also be a part of collectives or agencies, where it's like there's several doulas that work for the same company, and then they kind of rotate out and maybe do, when somebody goes into labor, maybe they're doing 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts, or assigned to specific, clients. There's a lot of different ways that collectives can work, but it's usually a group of people that have the same like birth philosophy, and operate and just kind of support each other in that capacity. There are also community doula programs, some that are like nonprofits, some that are funded by the city, by the state, by federal, funding, that might be initiatives to reduce negative like health and birth outcomes, especially with like people from marginalized communities, for example. So, like locally in Austin, we have an organization that's called GALS, and it really is like it's on-call doula support. So someone doesn't even have to be enrolled in their programs. Like you call their hotline, it's like, look, I'm in labor, and their whole thing is like, nobody births alone, right? And so they'll dispatch like a doula to you, no questions asked. And so there are other, community models that are like this, that are, they might not necessarily be trained and certified doulas, but they're people that will show up, right? And support a person, so that they aren't having to give birth alone, or if they feel unsafe within the environment, the hospital, the doctor, whatever it is that they need, that they feel safe in the space, like, that they're in, that their needs are being respected, their wishes are being respected. So and then there are also like some doulas that are employed like either by the hospital or by a birthing center, right? Texas isn't one of those states that has a lot of initiatives where doulas are funded through hospital, city, and state like organizations. Some places have that, right? And so in these kinds of environments, the doula isn't like, independent. She works directly for the hospital and just functions as a support person for clients as, as necessary. Sometimes having different like specialties, sometimes even just being with, like if the client speaks a different language, right? There might be one that's like, oh, here's a Spanish speaking, like doula that can help with not only translation services, but also help mom to, to get through birth safely and happily, inshallah. So again, sometimes we might see, oh, this is a certified doula, this is a community doula, certification. It's like, what does it matter and what does it mean? Technically, right now, certification is not legally required in any of the 50 U.S. states. I'm not sure about any other countries. And so that would be one of those things where if you're looking at doula programs and there's a certification, you might want to look at your state level and say, like, is this actually required? Can I be a doula without it? Um, and if that's the way that you want to go, then, then go for it, right? So because doulas are considered just, coaches, support companions, for most, like as of right now, certification is optional. And so, in the event that that changes, then there would be, I'm assuming, a little bit of like of lead time for that notice to be given, and then to kind of look at what those requirements like are. But as of right now, this is what, July 30th, 2025, and so as of right now, this is not something that is required. And so, but what certification does do sometimes is, for some people, it builds that sense of trust. It builds that confidence. It builds that aspect of like of credibility. The thing with it is that for every organization that offers a certification, these are self-governing organizations, right? So we can say, we can look at the big ones like Donna and Kappa and childbirth, common sense, like Childbirth Institute, like all these other ones that people might be interested in, which is like, fine, their regulations are going to be like their own. It's not something that is regulated like by the state. And so so their certification is kind of like in-house, and doesn't necessarily transfer from one certifying like organization like to another. A lot of doula programs do have cross certifying opportunities. Like if you're already a certified doula like somewhere else, that you can say, here's what we learned, here's what we studied, here's my experience, and then they'll say, okay, maybe here's another fee, and now we can, you can be under our umbrella of certification. Right. So sometimes it works like that. But, so for a lot of people, the aspect of being certified creates that general like credibility, right? It also will give a certain amount of like of confidence that this person has done the work and they know, what they're doing. But certification, and I mean, which is important, and I understand that, but certification also doesn't mean experience, because there are also plenty of people that have had plenty of experience supporting people like during birth, and they aren't certified, right? And so it's kind of like a person who's completed their certification and has supported like um, you know, two births, versus a person that never did a certification and has supported like 50 births or 100 births. Then sometimes that experience might actually be what matters the most, like to people. And so it's not to say that it doesn't matter, but it's to say that it's not required at this point, and people should really understand that and have clarity about that, because some agencies, some of the doula training organizations have certification requirements that create a lot of barriers for people, especially people from marginalized communities, right? And so that could be, oh, well, you have to support 5 families, and you have to, to pay, and you have to write, like an essay or research paper, and you have to pay us $200 like every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, right? Something like that. And so, just to maintain, that certification, where it's like these might be bigger chunks of money, especially if the doula is supporting, um, you know, non-paying clients or low-income clients, and that might create other barriers, for her to enter this work. And so, whenever it comes to kind of birth equity and birth justice, we also have to look at some of the barriers that are keeping the people that are passionate about these things out of the field, to be able to support people that they really need to reach, and the people that are most impacted by racism, and discrimination within our healthcare, for example. So, so experience matters. Experience is king whenever it comes to, to birth work, and certifications don't tell us like that much, but it does carry some weight. So the thing with it is that, like, for doulas who want to take insurance, for example, Texas isn't one of those like insurance friendly states for doulas. And so usually it ends up being that clients have to pay for the services outright. The doula will write a letter, stating the services of everything that was offered, and then submit that along with their provider information number, and kind of submit that so that the person can seek to file a reimbursement claim. But the doulas don't often take the insurance directly. There are some things like carrots, that offer, coverage, like for doulas. That's a different conversation for another day in terms of like, uh, like insurance and the ways to go about that. Some people's policies have that they can use, they can hire a doula for like using their health savings account, or their personal, personal health savings account, like those kinds of things, or flexible spending accounts. So sometimes those can be covered. Again, it will probably be the same thing. You give them a detailed invoice, or letter of like the services that were provided. You provide them with your contact information, and then they pay you, and then they can seek reimbursement like for those things. Every state is different. Some states do actually have that doula care is covered, like by insurance. That's going to vary kind of like place to place. And so it will be a matter of kind of digging into that, and letting that be actually a determining factor for whether you choose to certify or not. Because for some people, this is where the line goes. That if you're going to be in a place that says, doulas can be covered by insurance, they can be covered by Medicaid, they can be covered by health savings accounts and things like that, but they have to be certified. Then that's something that's going to be a determining factor for going for the certification, right? Other places don't have that, like, and so, or same thing with like hospitals, right? Like if you want to be actually employed by a hospital that provides doula care as a part of it, those typically require you to be certified. And sometimes they have restricted certifications for, like, oh, it has to be from this particular like organization. And if it's not, then you have to prove that you learned in a way that meets like certain criteria. I know that, like, even whenever I was in school to be a midwife, it was kind of like it was required for us to have doula training at some point. And so it's kind of like we had to show that we had a certification in order to bypass it. So it's like either have the certification or be able to get it, and they had to meet certain criteria. My program wasn't on the list of like approved, and so once I went through, and it's kind of like, here's the information that we learned. And we covered, pretty much like everything. And I took it at this time, and here's my certification, all that. Then it was approved, no problem. But sometimes there are those kinds of things of saying that, like, you have to kind of prove that you at least did the education part of it. So there's some flexibility with that. So it's important to remember certification is not required at this point. It's encouraged for a variety of reasons, and that mostly is like for insurance and like in kind of like advertising and like in marketing like purposes, and just kind of giving your clients like that reassurance. But again, plenty of people are certified and don't have experience. Like, so certified doesn't necessarily mean qualified in the ways that we think that it does, right? There's a lot of continuing education, a lot of experience that goes into you being a really qualified doula. And so it's like certification is the start, it's not the end. So some families, care about that more than more than others. Some families don't care at all. Some people really believe that like that your own lived experience, um, you know, matters more than like than any certification. And and I understand and respect that. Um, let's see. Okay. So there are some concerns and like and misconceptions whenever it comes to birth work. I have had people that say like, I don't even know like if this is allowed because there's a certain part of like, of privacy, right? Like, if people are giving birth, you might be exposed to people and like and just, there's a part of birth that's very like intimate, right? And so it's like if you think of it as like, okay, if this were a medical professional, then this wouldn't be like a concern. But it's like because it's a non-medical but still a professional, then that's when people come a little bit more into question. And so in general, it's kind of like, okay, you set your boundaries, you set your limitations, you kind of like look at it as like the good outweighs any potential harm. You may be exposed to people's like outer, right? Like the part that should be covered between the navel, like and the knees. I do my best to give clients, that privacy. So if they're getting a, cervical exam, for example, it takes nothing for me to just go behind the curtain, right? And just give that space. And then also I'm like, I say by mom and just kind of having that relationship is kind of like, I'm here, with you. I'm not, doing your cervical exam. I'm not the father of like this child. So I don't necessarily need to see the actual like birth of the baby, like being born. I can say right by mom's head and, and not be exposed to anything, right? Like in that, not anything, but it's like, and not be exposed in ways that people, think that just because you're there, that it's an inappropriate space. There's lots of ways to make it that that you have boundaries, that you have those barriers, that you can still like have your own like modesty and protect the modesty and privacy of like the mother. It's not impossible. So yeah, so there's that. You do not have to have medical training, or and you don't have to be a parent yourself to be able to be a doula, right? Like a lot of times people think, oh well, I've never given birth, so I can't be a birth worker, and it's kind of like that. Actually, is not true. For one, a lot of times, people that don't have, because it's like when you're a doula and you have your own like children, then it's like, oh, what about healthcare? What if I get called to birth and like, and my kid is sick? Right? If a parent person is not a parent, then it's like that's an advantage, like to you in a way that it might be an obstacle and a challenge for somebody that's already a parent. And at the same time, our own lived experiences don't make us experts in birth work either, right? Like I am, I'm a doula. I had all 7 of my kids before I became a doula, but and with that, like some people are kind of like, oh, well, that must mean that you're an expert. And it's like, I've never had a cesarean birth. I've never had like an epidural. So somebody that has had those experiences is more of an expert in those things than I am because I only know it from the book, right? And so it's a matter of like being able to, can we turn over to power to people, and allow them to experience this in its raw form and like and support and nurture and guide them with, with kindness, with empathy, and with compassion. Um, in a way that that doesn't take us having to have these experiences ourselves to be able to share that with people.